Good afternoon, everyone. This is Hard Talk with Marsha Walker, and we are going to jump right in because we have a full house this afternoon. Gary, I can't drop you very good. Gary, why does it look like you're going to play football after?
Yep, I have football with Mark Riley and others shortly.
So why does Mark Riley? Who's Mark Riley?
A fella, one part of the family who can really play sports good.
Listen, I don't have time with you and football and sports and my brother. So because I was going to say we have a full house this afternoon. After Gary Griffith, we have Gavin Nicholas, and then we have Nairi Alfonso and Christopher Jackman. So we have a full house this afternoon because, of course, we had another leg of the Paria case yesterday. So we'll discuss that later on. As promised, yes, last week, Gary, persons were actually talking about, bringing on political leaders. And of course, they want to see all the political leaders sit around a table, or even if it's a virtual table where you guys all sit around your own table and we have a conversation. Let's see how we deal with everybody sitting, having a conversation. Can we be mature? Discuss the country, discuss what's best for the country. Have it live. Let the country see. We would hate to think that you're talking to the president of the UK and the president of the US and the prime minister of the UK and all these world leaders, and somebody has a hissy fit and jumps up. So let's see how persons react sitting down. So that is a call that with some of the listeners, they were typing and whatnot, asking for such a conversation to happen, and they agreed that it didn't need to be like US debate style, big hall, whatever. Let's just start with the crawl. So I'm throwing that. I know that you are ready. I'll speak to Gavin about it as well when he comes on.
It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Definitely not with the UNC, the PNM, and definitely not with that one-man political party. Was it the
We're
Philip?
not going to give him much airtime. I gave him airtime last week because somebody did ask what was going on, and I did have to address it because I see he called my name again today, but I'm
He's
going
not going to do it. He's one of those
to have
individuals.
self-control.
He's comfortable and confident when he could speak to a camera, to himself, shout, argue, battle, criticize, be erratic. That's what happened when you're a politician, but you've never achieved anything. You've never held any post. So what you do is attack, discredit, and that's why when it is that you made the request for us to have a debate, I knew that he would moonwalk like Michael Jackson. He's not going to do it. He doesn't have the ability to be calm, to be controlled, to be able to come with facts, data. And if he's cross-examined, criticized, or in any way shows his lack of understanding in a debate, he will shout, scream, and he's that individual, which is on. You know what? It's like a mini Rowley.
Well, my own may come across a little bit more racist because I've said, we have an African raging bull. I really don't need a Caucasian or whatever. He calls himself what, a half Syrian or something. He says it all the time on his shows. So yeah, I don't know why you think that maybe we may accept that behavior a little bit more because your skin color lighter or. But anyways, we have serious conversations to have. So let's move along.
Sure.
But I do appreciate you taking the time because there are other, and I'm gonna no holds barred. I have invited Michaela Pandey, and I do think that political leaders, if you want, you are up for public office. You should be on every media house, everywhere, speaking, being interviewed. We want to hear from you. We want to know, and we already have one female political leader that shies away from the media. And we even friendly fire. You have to be able to answer hard questions, go wherever, whether it be a PNM or UNC or whoever, and face the media. So I tell people I am a little bit wary of any political leader who is not actively doing interviews for the media. So thank you very much for setting that example. The state of emergency, we have loads of calls from various stakeholders in the country even citizens, a lot of persons, you're hearing that coming up all the time, that phrase, it's time for a state of emergency, it's time for a state of emergency. So that is why you are here. Let us talk the calls for a state of emergency. Are we there?
Yeah, so what? So to clarify, we keep hearing sometimes they make the recommendation, let's have a limited state of emergency. There's no such thing. It is like saying you're half pregnant. So that's to clarify the comments being made. A state of
Wait, I'm going to
emergency is
stop
when
you
a
right
proclamation.
there. I am going to stop you there because I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I want to make sure that you're not taking friendly fire. August 21st, 2011, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, then Prime Minister, labeled it a limited state of emergency. If I am
Yeah, she
not
was
mistaken,
wrong. She's wrong. She didn't know better.
weren't you her national security advisor at that time?
At
So
that time, I was in a line, and this was 55 minutes before I got into Space Mountain. I was in Orlando with my family, and then
okay.
she gave me the call. She told me that several of them decided to call a state of emergency. I explained to her it is not relevant. A state of emergency is not a crime fighting tool. It should not be used as a crime fighting tool. So when she said a limited state, there's no such thing. A state, when you call a state of emergency, that goes across the whole country. What you can have in the state of emergency is a state of emergency with no curfew, a state of emergency where this Speaker of the House alone could be held under house arrest, a state of emergency with curfews in specific areas. So that, but that doesn't make it a limited state of emergency. As soon as the president makes that proclamation, the country is under a state of emergency. So that gives the police and full authority sometimes to go into a home without a warrant. And so we believe a state of emergency is based on a curfew or not. So they call it a limited state of emergency. No such thing. When you look at, so Kamala Prasad says, unfortunately, she didn't understand the law. In the same manner where it is, she recently said that during COVID, police had a two-tiered approach where they were arresting people if families were out by a beach or whatever, but people were allowed in a wedding. It's because of our ignorance and not understanding the law. The public health regulation at the time meant that Marsha could have 100 people in a
I got
home
married,
for Mother's
Gary.
Day.
My name is Marsha Walker.
Marsha Walker, sorry. Fine. Marsha Walker with 100 persons in her Mother's Day of whatever event, and there's nothing that the police could have done. If 5 of them left to go on the beach, the police could arrest them. It was very stupid, but we had to adhere to the law. So it means that political leaders are not really advised. It's just like Keith Rowley, he made the same comment to say that I should arrest people by the pool in their home. It was ignorance in him not understanding the law. So that's what usually happens when political leaders make comments without being properly briefed. So as it pertains to the state of emergency, as I said, that it should not be used as a crime-fighting tool. If, however, there's a clear and present danger of possible threat, assassination attempts of public figures, which is what was also claimed during 2011, then you could justify that. But you don't justify it because crime is increasing. What happens, in fact, is when you have a state of emergency, it affects the economy, it affects investment, it affects tourism, it can cause many businesses to shut down, it can then cause persons to be unemployed. That becomes a byproduct towards inflation, towards persons now being a greater need for money. It can cause an increase in crime. So it is a domino effect with a state of emergency. So you need to be very careful when you call it. In Jamaica, for example, they have something known as Zone of Special Operations, ZOSO, which is a state of emergency with a curfew in specific areas, in hotspot areas, that gives the army now some degree of better mobility and control accessibility with the police in specific areas. So those are things that we can do. If it is that the political leaders of the major parties do any research, they would have understood that when we had the Commission of Inquiry into the attempted coup, as the Minister of National Security at the time, I implemented 11 out of the 30 recommendations. One included a national alert state. National alert state can be used moving from green, amber, red, black, based on the escalation of the threat. You can now increase the presence of the law enforcement based on the clear and present danger. When you hear people say they're going to beef up security, it's not a ranch. So when there's no such thing as beefing up security, you can use a national alert state, which is what I did as Minister of National Security, and it shut down after. So those are the things that can be done. But as I said, my personal view is that a state of emergency should not be used as a crime-fighting tool. We did not have a state of emergency in 2013 to 2015, when it was the highest reduction in serious crime in 31 years. It just happened I was the Minister of National Security at the time. We did have a state of emergency in 2019 to 2021 when it was the highest reduction in violent crime in 17 years. I just happened to be commissioner of police at the time. So it means you put policies, you put plans, you
There
put...
was a reduction in murders. The lowest figure was under Pandy, and I don't believe there was a state of emergency then either.
Yeah, but I said last 17 years, so that left out
Uh,
Pandy.
but you worked under Pandy, so I mean, if you wanted to put yourself there.
Well, again, and that's why I would say the best minister of national security the country ever had was Brigadier Joseph Theodore. He was the minister at the time, and I looked at the things he did pre-2000, 1995 to 2000, and that's when the murder rate was less than 100. He was a no-nonsense guy. He didn't allow politicians to turn gang members into community leaders, giving state contracts to gangs. He dealt specifically with things using the type of technology, introducing community policing. And now, 23 odd years later, there are things that Joe Theodore did that we don't even have now. So it shows that we've actually gone back instead of moving forward. I implemented many of those things, and then the type of technology he didn't have then, using the dark web, social media monitoring, covert operators, and all of these things, unfortunately, have been shut down. So if it is you really want to reduce crime, it's not a state of emergency. A state of emergency is a knee-jerk press button panic response, and there's going to be a domino effect later.
You spoke about Jamaica and the special zones, but you used the state. I understood where you were going until you used back the term state of emergency. Do they have something special in terms of law, policy? How did they make that happen, where the entire country isn't under state of emergency, but just that area, that town, that city?
It was an amendment to the law known as ZOSO, the Zone of Special Operations. So that specified, instead of putting a curfew, a state of emergency throughout the whole country, instead of having a curfew throughout the whole country, you give authority for the relevant arms of protective services to pinpoint specific hotspot areas where these units can now intensify their resources, their patrols, their operations in those areas, giving them positions where it is that they can actually go into homes without a warrant and so forth. It has proven to be effective anytime there is that zone of special operation in Jamaica. It is something that we can very well consider. But again, and that will take away the impact of having a nationwide state of emergency.
All right. This is the first time that I feel as though you've answered my questions and I kind of done. It's really because you have football to go to. I mean, I said 4 to 4:30. I don't understand. I should have really, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm giving Gary a half an hour to talk. This is not going to be enough. I can't start with a monologue. I can't do nothing because it's Gary and he only have a half an hour. Look at it, 4:17, and you.
I can't stretch it. I can't stretch it to show that again. The state of emergency, when it is that we saw what happened in 2011, you have to be very careful with the state of emergency unless your law enforcement agencies are properly trained to understand how a state of emergency works. And if it is that the hierarchy of the law enforcement can be manipulated by politicians, you will get a repeat of what took place in 2011. 2011, you recall, because of the state of emergency, politicians obviously would have put pressure on the hierarchy of the police service, and we had hundreds of young men being arrested unlawfully, illegally. And because of that, the taxpayers, they're still paying the price. All of that has to do with the repercussions of a state of emergency. So when it is I heard the political leader of the UNC state that, yes, she thinks that we need to call a state of emergency. Hold up, calm down. We saw what happened then. The present prime minister, he deliberately tried to avoid calling a state of emergency because he knows there are usually political repercussions in it, which is why he used public health regulations. And that is why through the public health regulations, it meant that the police did not have the authority to do what was required in a state of emergency, which is why the two political leaders of the two major political parties, based on ignorance in them both not understanding the law, both said that the police should have arrested persons in their homes during COVID, not understanding the police did not have that authority because it was not a state of emergency, it was not a curfew. And public health regulations meant that someone can have 100 people in their home, nothing could be done. But if 5 leave their home to go by the beach, something could be done. So when you heard Kamala Prasad sadly make a very foolish comment to state it was a two-tiered approach. What she did basically is to disrespect the hard-working police officers that 31 of them lost their lives. unlike police services around the world during COVID, where police officers abused their authority, they were abandoned their posts. Not one police officer abandoned their post. Not one police officer went above and beyond, abused his authority or her authority. And 31 of them lost their lives. So to have a political leader who wants to be the prime minister disrespect police officers based on what they did during COVID, they had limited authority because of the public health regulation. And sadly, what this government has done is to praise 4 persons in the Ministry of Health, because what they did every Wednesday for a year is to tell people, wear a mask, social distancing, and do a vaccine. And for that great work you did, Terence Dial Singh and Ruston and Mariam Richards, because of that great work, let's give you a national award. And not even a word of thanks to the police officers who would have been the front line, not the army. The army never came out. They stayed on standby. So 34 years later, the Defense Force is still on standby since 1990, waiting to justify why it is that there should be a Defense Force, which is unfortunate to them. It's not their fault. It's because politicians are ignorant to understand the role and function of the Defense Force.
What is the role and function of the Defense Force?
There are 5, the role and function, 5 different things. The 3 main that you will see is ceremonial duties, which you will know. Also to defend our country from external aggression, but there's also an aid to civil power. That aid to civil power would give them the opportunity to perform their duties based on their training. The comments made by many people that soldiers are trained to kill. Yes, we are trained to kill, but we are also trained to defend. I would know that because I was the first Trinidad and Tobago citizen to return home with a United Nations peacekeeping medal, and it's the word peacekeeping medal. So the Defense Force can very well be used to complement the police service in the performance of their duties. That it is not being done. Out of 5,000 members of the Defense Force, 500 have remained at Piaco in Air Guard for the last 5 years. They are unable to fly a chicky-chunk kite, far less anything else, because there's no aircraft and no helicopter for them. You have 1,000 in Coast Guard that have not been able to do much of anything because there are no vessels, thanks to the incompetence of this government, not understanding preventative maintenance, even though I acquired 6 Diamond vessels to do exactly what the 3 OPPs could have done, but for $1.2 billion less. And then you have 2,500 members of the Army who have all been in camp, whether it be Kamuto, Ogden, or Tetron Barracks, waiting for a war to take place, which is incorrect. They can very well operate. It's just about 100 out of that 2,500 are part of the IATF, which is the Interagency Task Force. They can do a lot more, but to do that, they need proper training. There's someone that I know very well. There's a report now where soldiers worked on a joint patrol with the police, and they pointed guns to the head of these young men and women. And those are the things that will affect the image of the Defense Force and even the police service. Unless you have mechanisms to make sure that you can prevent this through the 482 Gary online reporting, the use of your phone to record these individuals, it can destroy public trust and confidence. But going back to the Defense Force, it shows that there's a lot more that they can and should do. And I intend to do that. Let me finally add on that point. That's why Patrick Manning, he had the vision to understand the use of the Defense Force. That's why he formed the Special Anti-Crime Unit, SAUTT. What he did not do was to make the legal amendments to give them the authority, because it was led by someone who was previously in the Defense Force. And by doing that is what caused the collapse of the Special Anti-Crime Unit. I understood the value of it, which is why I piggybacked from it, and I formed the National Security Special Operation Group as a minister, and then the Special Operation Response Team as a commissioner. And that pegged back the criminal elements by having the best of the best soldiers, police officers working together, highly trained, properly polygraphed, to put fear into the criminals whilst making sure they are properly trained. If that is done, we can now see the value of the Defense Force.
So you do think that there is a space for joint patrols, but we need some more training, and we need, I guess you're saying, some special legislation is needed?
No, the Defense Force, based on their regimental, there will be regimental police. I think your father was one, in fact. And that regimental police
when you
are
spoke
highly
about
trained.
Joe Theodore, I would say, yes.
I forgot that. Yes.
Yes, and he was actually my dad's godfather, but because they were in the army, no one knew that. Because of course, and so you spoke about Joe Theodore's hand, and he treated my dad so harshly to make sure that no one could ever accuse them of, because of that godfather relationship, that there was any favoritism and stuff. So when you said that he was the best minister of national security, I smiled inside, tried to keep my professional hat on, because I knew how close my dad and Joe were.
Yeah, he was a good. When I graduated as an officer, Joe Theodore was the chief of defense staff. He looked at me from head to toe, looked at everything, and I spent hours trying to prepare myself. And when I looked like I finally cracked it, and Joe Theodore was just walking away, and then he stopped. He looked around, and he found a twisted shoelace, and I lost the opportunity to leave camp for about 2 weeks because of that. Yes, that is Joe Theodore. But I had the world of respect for him. And I've noticed that the previous Attorney General is on board, so I could hand over now, and I could go and play my football.
Yes. So you see, he heard that you had football to go to, so he did you a professional courtesy, and he came on early so that you can go play football.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Take care.
Thanks, Gary, for taking the time. Former Attorney General Gavin Nicholas, thank you very much. I know for a couple of weeks we have been trying to get you on, so I'm really thankful that you took the time. I'm not sure how long you were logged on, if you were hearing in the back, but I did speak about political leaders who are fearful of the media. That is something that I personally kind of, it's a red flag. So I'm always happy when we can have political leaders, we can have those who've placed themselves up for public service, face the fire. Hopefully it's friendly fire today. So thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, Marsha. It's definitely nice to be with you. I am certainly not somebody who's afraid of facing the media. It's unfortunate that our schedules weren't able to line up over the last 2 weeks. But as I said, once I got enough notice, I was able to put you in and not just pencil you in, but pen you in to ensure that I could be here this afternoon.
Awesome. And I'm so happy to have you. My first experience, like face to face with you, would have actually been during the local government elections. I remember you pulled me aside and you gave me some advice. And immediately, I it's like the respect levels went from here to here. I'd only known you from afar, and I felt like, oh, this is a real statesman. And that's not something, unfortunately, I see often on the ground in politics. Someone who is a real statesman, friendly, dignified, articulate, so I don't know if I told you that then, but I'll tell it to you live.
That is very kind of you.
So I was happy that you were able to pen me in. We saw, let me get a little bit serious now. I saw on the news on Monday that there was an 11-year-old, a Newtown Boys, so standard force pupil, and he was robbed. They threw him onto the floor, 2 men, and they took $27 from his pocket. I felt to me, one, this is my feeling, that can't be gang. That's not grand larceny. It sounds like some version of desperation to be able to rob an 11-year-old boy, push him to the floor, dip into his pocket, and take $27. Gary would have spoken a little bit about his take on unlimited states. Well, he said there's no limited state of emergency. On any state of emergency, the effect in the end, actually, the economy, everything will then, in the end, have a negative impact on crime because you're not solving the root causes. What are your thoughts on our crime situation? I don't know if you heard of the robbery with the 11-year-old. As I said, I feel as though that sounds sort of like a desperate crime, a crime of someone who is desperate to eat or something. I don't know.
I must say I haven't heard of that particular crime. I have been bombarded with so many different crimes. It's really not a pleasant experience to have to read the newspapers, to go on Facebook, to listen to the blogs or anything like that, as far as the crime situation is concerned in Trinidad and Tobago. And I've heard Gary has a particular experience, a particular qualification. He has been through the military. He's been a Minister of National Security. He's been a Commissioner of Police. And he obviously has a take on how to deal with crime from that level. I have been looking at how other countries have dealt with crime because as a lawyer, I guess I have grown accustomed to being reliant on precedent. So you look for precedent that works and that is applicable to a particular situation. And for me, I have looked around the world to see the countries that have low crime rates, the countries that have had high crime rates but have dealt with it and have now reduced their crime rates, and try to learn from their example. In particular, for me, I recently looked at the situation in Scotland. And it's very interesting because Scotland has a population of 5.5 million people. And a few years ago, Scotland was considered to be the most dangerous place in the UK. And now it is considered to be the safest place in the UK. A little bit of the statistics will tell you that in a population of 5.5 million people, they had 52 murders in 2022-2023. That is down from their high of 109 murders 20 years ago. So they have seen a 52% drop in crime from 20 years ago. And 10 years ago, the murder rate was 62. They had 62 homicides. So a 16% drop over the last 10 years. So unlike Trinidad and Tobago, where you are seeing a constant increase in the murder rate, in the homicide rate, you have seen a drastic fall of some 50% over the last 20 years. Now, interestingly, and this to me is extremely impressive, since 2013 to now, they have had 605 homicides, and they have solved every single one. Every single one. Now, if I were in the police service, if I were the present Minister of National Security, instead of jollying all over the place and talking a bunch of nonsense and wasting people's time, I would be in Scotland trying to find out what it is they did to reduce homicides, gang violence, crime in general, to ensure that the crime came down and people felt safer. Now I've looked at it and I've looked at the number of different initiatives that they have actually implemented. I mean, they have had organizations that deal specifically with things like human trafficking, serious organized crime, violence against women, violence and knife crime, because they don't really have gun crime the way we have gun crime. They have knife crime. But of course, it's still knife crime that led to homicides, hate crime, sharing intimate videos, cybercrime, sexual offenses, etc. But they have also then gone a little deeper, and they have gone into how you deal with poverty and inequality as an aspect of the causes of crime. Because you see, it's one thing to deal with crime after the fact. It is one thing you pray and you put up walls and you put security cameras and electric fences and all of those things. But those are really just keeping the criminals at bay as opposed to removing criminal thinking and the causes that lead to criminal behavior, that lead to that 11-year-old being thrown on the ground and his $27 being taken from him. They have gone to try to figure out what exactly are these causes. So they have dealt specifically with child poverty. They have a plan to eradicate child poverty from Scotland. So there is supposed to be no child subject to poverty. There is no child that shouldn't have a meal when the day comes. They should, and they've ramped up their welfare programs so that you deal with a fair distribution of welfare and that sort. So essentially, their national security minister recognized his role, which is to protect the citizens of Scotland, unlike our national security minister, who doesn't seem to know his role. And that is, I mean, people may laugh at that, people may scoff at that, but the reality is, if you have a national security minister who doesn't understand his role is to ensure the safety and protection of citizens, then he would not be on a Thursday afternoon sitting down contemplating ways in which to make the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago safer, because that's not his role. So the first thing we have to do is to get a national security minister who understands what his role is. Get a prime minister who understands what his role is. Because again, the prime minister has abdicated his role as the head of the National Security Council and is blaming others for the crime situation. So if you have those two people who do not understand their role is to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and to come up with policies and programs to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, not just by having more boots on the ground, etc., but by actually targeting the causes of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, then we are going nowhere. So I want to first start by saying that what we first need is a recognition that somebody needs to be in the job who is interested and understands that we need to protect the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and we don't have that now.
As political leader, my take on it, once you are the political leader of a political party, it means that you are prepared to lead the country. Yes?
Well, you should be.
Right. So, political leader, what is the role for the MND in 2025? We know in the local government election, you would have formed an accommodation, the NTA, the MND, and the UNC. How did that experience work out? You would have left, I guess there are tons of different questions. So I could break it up or I could just kind of ask all and then you could take a shot at it.
Sure.
You were part of the People's Partnership. You didn't stay with the UNC. Well, I think nobody in the partnership stayed, but you moved on from being in the UNC to, your own political party. What is the future of MND? What can we see in 2025?
Okay. First of all, the MND existed before 2010 partnership.
Okay.
So we actually came on board with the UNC when Kamala Prasad Bisesa won the leadership election. Because once the leadership election was announced, we said we supported her, and we said that we would join with her if she won. And so said, so done. So I behaved like a member of the UNC during the partnership. And that is why I wasn't one of those people who stayed out and acted as prime minister because I was a leader of a party as part of the partnership. I just went in and did work for the people. Post 2015, I took a little stand back with the MND and looked at things. But the reality is that we still supported the agenda of the UNC as far as it related to keeping the PNM in check and ensuring that we could bring good governance to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In the last local election, where we formed the accommodation and we all worked together, I worked for UNC candidates, for NTA candidates. It didn't matter because I was working for Diego Martin to be improved. At the end of the local government election, having actually spoken with the people across Diego Martin and others, and looking at the results, it was then clear to me, and this might be an unpopular position, but it was then clear to me that really and truly there were only two political parties that people recognized in Trinidad and in Trinidad. I can't say Tobago, in Trinidad, and that is the PNM and the UNC. As much as I would like to say that the MND could go it alone, and probably if I got some kind of massive lotto win with $100 million and I could put all the infrastructure in place and get the people on board, perhaps that might be possible. But in the present circumstances, I believe that there are only two political parties that will be of significance in the 2025 election. It isn't to say that there are not good people with good ideas who are parts of smaller parties. In fact, there are. And I always have great respect for people who stand up against the odds and try to make a change. But because of my plenty experience now, I can safely say that it is going to be a PNM-UNC race. And because of that, the leader of the UNC, the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, will decide whether PNM goes back in power or Trinidad and Tobago moves on, because it is totally in her hands. As leader of the UNC, as leader of the opposition, she has the power to make that happen or destroy it.
How so?
Very candid.
How so?
The people of Trinidad and Tobago, they despise the PNM. They despise the PNM for good reason. One, the PNM have destroyed the economy with an extremely arrogant Minister of Finance at the helm. They have put all their eggs in the energy basket, again, not diversifying the economy. And we live in the young hope of something happening 4 years down the road with oil and gas to revive the economy. We have become extremely unsafe as a nation because of what I've spoken about a little while ago. Young people are not seeing any hope for progress in Trinidad and Tobago. Young qualified people are finding it very difficult to come back to Trinidad and Tobago, and many are leaving. Many business people have left Trinidad and Tobago, and once you have that brain drain and that economic drain, you are not going to improve Trinidad and Tobago's standing. And you cannot keep taxing Trinidad and Tobagonians to revive the economy. That is the dumbest economic plan that you could possibly have. It is just stupid. And I can't understand how more people haven't actually stood up and rebelled against this nonsense. You are also taking the people of Trinidad and Tobago for granted with basically stagnant salaries, almost a double increase in food prices, double increase in petrol prices. The services are horrible. And even with the payment of the property tax, which is an absolute fiasco, you have the valuation system for the property tax has been rubbish. There are so many people who are querying it. There are people who have had 2 sets of valuations for the same property, all sorts of nonsense. And to top it off, Marsha, the same finance minister who talks about a cashless economy, who want to go in that direction, does not put in place a platform for citizens to safely, conveniently, and efficiently pay their tax online. Instead, you have to waste a whole heap of man hours. You have to inconvenience yourself. You have to either stand in sun or rain to pay the tax. I mean, it is foolish on so many levels. It is uncaring. It is arrogance personified. And then you are threatening people, of course, with all sorts of sanctions if they don't make the payment on time. So I
I
come
also
back.
heard there were some days the links machine, you couldn't pay by link, so you needed to have cash.
Yes. Imagine you are forcing people to walk the road in this crime ridden environment with cash to go and pay property tax, lining up in hot sun or rain to do it for hours. It is just insane. So I come back to the role of Kamala Prasad Bisesa as leader of the UNC, as leader of the opposition. And having just articulated the reasons why people don't want the PNM, are fed up with the PNM, are disgusted with the PNM. You need to provide an alternative to the PNM that people can now look and say, you have this worthless crop and we have this progressive crop. We know for sure who we could support. Now, to be fair, I have listened to her and she has been able to articulate some very good manifesto type policies that I believe can actually help Trinidad and Tobago and the people of Trinidad and Tobago move forward. I may not agree with everything she says, but she has certainly thought through and they've done a lot of work in preparing a manifesto document that I believe can transform Trinidad and Tobago. And as such, she needs to get as many people on board as possible. She needs to get a team that the people could be confident with, so confident in, and ensure that we are well placed to challenge the PNM in 2025. Anything else, we are putting the PNM back in power for another 5 years, and God help us all.
Do you believe she's doing that right now? Do you believe she's putting a team in place? What does it look like to you? Let's be frank.
Well, from here, I in Pity Valley where I am, I can't see it. Unfortunately,
And
it is not to say that work isn't probably being done, but I cannot see it from here at this time.
we just had 5 MPs. I mean, after the NATEX election, the senators spoke, DPL John spoke, Wade Mark spoke, and said, there'll be healing after NATEX. After NATEX, what you see are MPs who use their constitutional right, persons who would have challenged not even leadership, because leadership was not up for grabs. They've been moved, which of course we know when you move down on the bench and whatever, we know what that sort of signals. There is no healing. We've seen an alderman leave, cross the floor, go on to PNM. Well, of course, I've spoken out. I've said I will not be representing. I did not file nomination under the present version of the UNC. And I hear you when you speak about only 2 parties, but I would tell you that local election, the first day, I could tell you from general election 2020, because I went as a candidate in Diego Martin West, and I heard non-stop, Marsha, I like you, but I vote for UNC. So it's surprising to hear a fellow Valley man say there's only 2 parties, because if it's one place, I think that a third party stands a chance in this country are the 3 Diego Martins.
Well, remember, I contested Diego Martin Central, and in fact, I put up 3 candidates for the MND. Of course, it was on an absolute shoestring budget because I didn't get money from anybody. I didn't go soliciting money or anything like that. It was an absolute shoestring budget. But we had 3 candidates, And we did get people coming out by their hundreds and supporting us. But of course, they all said, listen, we will support you on principle because we like your policies. We know that you're important to the process, but we know you can't win. One, because you don't have the resources to reach the people. But two, you're only putting up 3 candidates, and therefore you will have to form an alliance with somebody at the end. So you're not going to be on your own. Of course, they didn't understand that the power of 3 candidates deciding who becomes the government actually holds a lot of power and can get a lot of things done for them. But I think until such time that the population is mature enough, because you see, we have a bad habit.
I was going to ask you, what year was that you went up in Diego Martin Central? Because I know you were also part of.
That was last general election. Last general election, I had 3 candidates for.
Oh, that was 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the local election prior, I also put candidates.
Right.
For
so that would have been in the social media era.
Yes.
Because I want to say that in 2007, I mean, the COP got some 20%. I think it was 22%, if to be exact. I mean, they didn't win a seat. Of course, we weren't going to proportional representation and all of that, right? But I mean, again, I go back to Diego Martin. Keith Rowley, 29,000 votes available, and he, on his best year, got 14,000, yes. Right? I don't think he will get 7,000 this round if he gets that much. Yeah, anybody.
Well, I would like to think, honestly, that again, if I had a really nice budget.
But social media, I think social media
is not enough.
You don't think?
It's not enough. Because not enough people are on social media, and Trinidad politics requires face-to-face contact. It requires that dynamism of interaction, which I believe in. I love that.
No, I agree. I do agree. But I mean, but just like you, but just like you, first of all, I think it's near impossible to walk and touch 29,000 persons. I have put together a shoestring budget because that's what Diego Martin gets anyway. Even if you have a big budget, that's what Diego Martin gets. So maybe I'm just still
the point is this:
young and naive. Maybe
if you have a third party, like say the MND did what the NTA did at general election, where you had a one-on-one fight, we would have done a hell of a lot better, because then people would say, okay, we can win with this because it's a one-on-one. It's not a split. The minute you split it,
right,
the minute you have the MND and the UNC going up against each other and the PNM, the people will get confused, the people will get frustrated, the people will stay home, the people will rightly say stoops.
But then, I mean, and I understand what you're saying, but I did not experience that on the ground. I can send you voice messages where persons called on the morning, and all I could do, because I can't canvass for votes, I can't campaign, all I could say is, okay, they got there, they saw UNC, and they were upset. They said, but Marsha, I thought you were NTA. I said, no, I'm UNC. But you walked with Gary. I hear Gary. Yes, but I'm UNC.
Yes.
I can't vote for UNC.
You have that, but you also have, again, just those would be a small proportion of the numbers.
You think so?
Because when I walked the Diego Martin Northeast Central and mostly Diego Martin Northeast and Central, there are people who would say, yeah, we don't want the UNC. But at the end of the day, the UNC got more votes than everybody else.
Yeah. Well, Northeast, I think Northeast has a good chance with in UNC.
Northeast with one candidate against the PNM, and Central with one candidate against the PNM, and even West with one candidate against the PNM, whether it is under UNC, an MND, an NTA banner, but one candidate with the knowledge that we are all part of one group, stands a very good chance. But the minute you split it,
Right. Well, we had PEP split for local government.
yeah,
Yeah.
the minute you split it, that's the end of the thing. So what we also need are mature politicians or people in politics, because I don't consider myself a politician. I am just somebody who happened to be in politics, who was drafted into politics at a very, very early age. And I like doing things and getting things done for people. And
There's a lot of persons who don't know your history, because I remember when you spoke to me about being in the Diego Martin, well, then it would be the regional corporation. I didn't know a lot of that. Maybe you could just give some of your history. So I think persons look at you as you jumped in politics as the Attorney General.
no, I started in politics at the age of 24, which is more than, so I have been in politics more than half of my life. And I was part of the PNM organization when Keith Rowley, Ken Valley, and Colum Imbot were elected for the very first time. I was elected as a local government councillor at the age of 25.
That was under PNM.
That was under the PNM. I had an absolute safe seat. I could have been in a safe seat for life if I had continued along that road. But I walked away from the PNM voluntarily after my term, simply because I didn't agree with their brand of politics. I will say no more with regards to that. I love the PNM supporters who I interacted with in Diego Martin. I was part of the first Diego Martin Regional Corporation, that first council. I absolutely enjoy the people. I love. I have no problem with PNM people or PNM supporters. There's a lot I have in common with them. Play football with them, go to school with them. They were my neighbors, my friends, my family. We have similar ideals, except that they believe that the leadership has their best interests at heart when they don't. So I walked away from the PNM and I hoped that I could convince them that they could get a better way of being represented under a different party. And that is what I've been trying to do, to explain to them that at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter who that leader is. What is important is the service that they get. So over the last 33 odd years, I have seen the life of Diego Martin get harder, get less safe, get less joyful. Because when I grew up in Diego Martin, we used to play football. I used to play football for the Maraval team called Icebergs. We would go into Bellevue and play against teams. We'd play in Carnage, we'd play in Diego Martin, we'd play in Pity Valley, and we knew everybody and we got along with everybody. Everybody felt safe. We walked the street, no problem. That kind of inter-constituency and inter-village football died a long time ago. That inter-community activity, cultural expressions died a long time ago. And that is what actually kept us safe, kept us in touch with each other, respecting each other. And so community life is important. Now, in the last couple of years, hastily, we have seen a number of community centers built in Diego Martin. We have seen in Paria, all of a sudden you have all kind of development, because of course now the representative is feeling some kind of pressure, and So he's trying to consolidate his power by doing things after 33 years. After 33 years, the football ground opposite his office is still a dilapidated ground, even though there's a massively new community center built. And now, luckily, I mean, the village council, some of the members of the village council I know, and they're very productive and they're getting things done, which I like to see. And I would like to see a lot more community activity with all these community centers being built. But of course, you don't really have it.
No, we don't. Don't get me started on community centers because they're moving the farmers in Bagatelle. Not Bagatelle.
Yes, in Bagatelle.
In Bagatelle.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
In fact, I highlighted it because
yes.
To
put up another community center.
Yeah. Well, they say it's a sporting facility.
Yeah.
Now,
but the Merry Boys can't play with the new big Bagatelle center. It's best they left it the way it was. And then
that is the absurdity.
The community center opposite where FCB used to be. That is barely going on. I mean, it has like one dance class or something. First of all, the way the community, you see this building full of concrete is not a community center, if you ask me. It's a waste of time. Mm-hmm. So when you started talking about community centers, I had to say, stay quiet. Stay quiet because very upset.
It's obviously somebody got a number of good contracts.
That's it. That's all it is.
Massive community centers. But there is no real thought put into it. So that you don't have...
all it is, Gavin. It was thought. Don't pretend that they don't know what they're doing. They thought about it. Somebody needed to pay a financer so that you'd have campaign
besides
financing
that, yes.
for 2025. But that's the thought. That's the thought behind it.
So because there is no community development.
It's not serving. The politics of the PNM is not to serve. That's not. And dare I say, the country feels that the politics of the UNC seem to no longer be that either. Because just like you, I mean, I was never a member of the PNM. My father campaigned with PNM. I grew up in a PNM home because in Diego Martin, that's what it is. You hear PNM. But after living in Diego Martin all my life, similar to you, I cannot stand by, and this makes no sense. So just like you, I felt I needed to get involved. And when I looked around, the option was go as an independent. I remember talking to Amory Brown and saying, come now, Amory, you could go as an independent. You go win over Darrell Smith. And Amory, just like you said, that's not going to work. Tapped me on my shoulder and said, there, naive little girl. But I thought Amory was a good MP. He was performing, and I thought he could win on his own. Don't worry. Over Darrell Smith, come the man. But as you say, we still have that sort of tribal view, the way politics is. And I've done 2 elections now, and everybody goes, I love you, but they can't see the candidate in front of them. They see more than the candidate in front of them.
Yes.
Marsha, excuse me. Yes. Can you see the comments on the comments board?
I can't actually. Where do I look for it? Because I saw them last time, so I was interacting. I figured nobody was listening or watching because I wasn't seeing anything.
It's fully loaded with comments.
Really? Oh my goodness! How do I see it?
Don't you have the comments? No,
I was clicked on private. Oh my goodness, guys! I'm so sorry.
Yes, lots and lots of comments.
See comments.
Good afternoon, guys.
Oh, I was on the wrong thing. I was on private chat. So that's why it was just empty. And I'm saying, but nobody listening to me.
No, a lot of comments there.
Oh, wow. Okay. So UNC is a bunch of racists. That will never happen with UNC. But I do think Trinbagonians need to be more politically educated. And that is where I was going, Gavin, in terms of, so you spoke about we need to mature as a people. And I think social media allows that. TikTok allows it, I guess that's where I get hope. But there is nowhere now where I cannot walk. In fact, I'm thinking I put on a cap now or something, and persons do not recognize me. And I think the persons that are recognizing me is what gives me hope because they're young. I mean, my daughter's 14 and her friends recognize me. And I do not do personal stuff on my TikTok. My TikTok is straight politics. And I believe in political education. So I'm not here on the ray and the jam and the bacchanal. I will explain. I will use the data like the 29,000 so that when you say to me, my vote doesn't count, I will say to you, well, yes, it does. Because out of 29,000, I do not even need to convince a PNM strong supporter. Because if I get 10, 15,000 of the non-voters, I could bring this thing home.
Oh, yes.
So then, and I also, so we have that. Plus you have the fact that we can put a MND, well, I will use COP, right? So that, MND, NTA, NAR, whoever, you can put one or two or three independent, whoever, you can put good candidates in there and they can make a difference. They can be the difference that you need. Similar to that independent senator, they can bring the balance. I remember when I first got into politics, not even in politics, but just being aware of politics and listening in as a concerned citizen. I used to always look out for the independent senator's contribution in parliament because I felt as though they're gonna, cut through the party, UNC say something, PNM say something, and then I'll listen for the independent.
Yes. Those were the days when independent senators were
independent. Yes. And so I do actually really think that there is value in a third party, in having third party candidates be there. So I agree with this political education. And I guess that is why I am still here doing TikTok videos, doing this show wherever I can, hoping that we can become a mature society. Because I say we have the leadership that we deserve.
But let me say one thing. The numbers still matter. And the numbers matter in Trinidad, the numbers matter in the United States of America, the numbers matter in the United Kingdom, where you still have predominantly two parties. It is why Trump is so happy that JFK Jr., with his very small percentage, joined him, because he knows that it is a very small group of people who will make the difference. At the end of the day, the people who will decide the presidency of the United States are the marginal seats. There are about 5 or 6 marginal states, and they're the ones who are going to decide the election.
Well, that's why Gary says to Kamala, you need me. Kamala standing up saying, we don't need nobody. And Gary is saying, you need me. But every Monday morning, you are seeing a tit for tat between the NTA and the UNC.
Yes, because again, those conversations need to take place in private, not in public. Because anytime you have people having those conversations in public, people have to save face. And once you're in the game of saving face, once you're in the game of saving face, nothing happens. You have to have mature conversations in private. Of course, and you're right, if private conversations don't get to happen, and you are interested in the people of Trinidad and Tobago, then you may have to just stand up and say, well, the people, you have to come clean with the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and they have to make a decision. Because it is very, very frustrating for me. It is I feel a sense of depression a lot of times, because I have seen so many other countries that have done so much more with so much less. And we in Trinidad and Tobago keep getting less and less and less and less and less. And we are not exploring how we can actually make Trinidad and Tobago see its full potential. We are not exploring how we can make the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago happy, safe, prosperous people. Because that is what I believe. We have 1.5 million people. We have the resources to make Trinidad and Tobago citizens Doesn't matter your ethnicity, doesn't matter where you live geographically, it doesn't matter your religion, it doesn't matter your education. We have the potential to make every citizen safe, prosperous, and joyful. Imagine Finland getting the happiest country in the world. Finland is a cool ass place that seeing darkness for half of the year and doesn't have what we have. We have 6 to 6 sunlight. We have beaches, we have flora, we have fauna. There's a $1 trillion tourism industry out there that we are not tapping into. Instead, we continue to run down Maduro for his oil. We ignore the revenue streams that are easily available, that all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago could participate in, could be independent entrepreneurs who could grow, develop, take care of their families and not need a handout. That is the kind of Trinidad and Tobago that I aspire to. That is what frustrates me, that we continue to put people in power who don't give a damn about you, the people, who are only enriching a small clique of people who are becoming multi-triple billionaires types and who don't give a damn about you, who will talk nonsense to your face and tell you, we'll raise electricity, we will raise petroleum, doesn't matter, we will increase agriculture, but nothing is being done. You know, just you have to pay property tax in Hudson and rain. You know, that kind of arrogance, that uncaring behavior. And citizens continue to take it, and I don't understand how and why. I don't.
Well, I'm so happy that you say you don't understand, and I'm so happy that you are frustrated because I mean, that's how I feel. That honestly is how I feel. And just like you, I've walked away. I'm not the type to sit and just be in a party for being in a party's sake. And if I can't stand behind the brand of politics, right? But you're speaking things like hopelessness, depression. I'm looking at someone in front of me like Gavin Nicholas, who I could really buy into his brand of politics. And you're saying that, at the end of the day, MND cannot go and just take away the tiny votes. You're going to have to join. But who are you joining with? I will say it quite frankly, I can't buy into Rudal Munilal as the next prime minister. I can't. Right? I can't buy into a lot of the names of some of the persons who are there right now. Someone is saying, Kamala, Gary, and Michaela need to show unity because at the end of the day, citizens will all suffer. But personally, I think that removing PNM cannot be the be-all and end-all. It can't be our goal to just remove PNM. I think just like you, PNM, I mean, I think they've...
No, but it is a starting point that we must do it. I mean, joke is joke, but the PNM must be removed.
And then like NAR and the People's Partnership, and then it breaks up, and then what? We need to remove them for more than a term. So we need to remove them. The country doesn't have the tolerance, Gavin, like they have for PNM. So a government, a non-PNM government coming in 2025 will not have the tolerance that PNM has. So the government must be ready to take the country forward. A country and that's a mammoth task. So it cannot be a marriage of convenience. And to be honest, I think that citizens are not necessarily trusting of a marriage of convenience anymore because of what happened with the People's Partnership. And then, of course, I mean, the PNM is very good at propaganda. So they're going to remind us of NAR and of People's Partnership and of this and of that. Now, our time is up. I'm going to give you the last say. Let me just very quickly. Yeah, so no third party will win. Everybody's talking basically unity, unity, unity. And of course, they're agreeing with you. You have a lot of fans here. People are loving you, by the way. And, Gavin, I would like to see you involved in active politics. I would like to see someone like you on the opposition bench in the Senate. That's the first place that I would like to see you right now. If it
Marsha,
is that we are serious about
there
being a
are
viable option.
there are many very good people out there. I listen to a lot of very good people who come on the television on a morning program and speak on relevant issues, who I believe, if I were the leader of the opposition, I would reach out to and bring together a very strong, dynamic team of people who are capable in finance, who are capable in national security, who are capable in trade and in expanding the economy, who are capable and interested in solving the problems that exist in Trinidad and Tobago. But at the end of the day, our political system is such that Kamala Prasad Bissessa, who is the leader of the UNC and the leader of the opposition, she has the resources, she has the party with the biggest following, and if she doesn't do what she has to do, then she will be judged by history. But unfortunately, we will all pay for it unless people recognize or she decides that she's not up to the task and she's not interested in the task, and then it will be up to the other people, all of us, to come together and offer ourselves to the people of Trinidad and Tobago with a viable plan, not as a pickup side, but with a viable plan to transform Trinidad and Tobago into the dynamic, happy country that it can be, that I dream about, that I yearn for, and that really and truly will be the only thing that will take me happily to my grave.
Gavin, thank you so, so, so much. I feel your pain and we will talk more. Thank you
Thank you for
very,
having
very
me, and I hope I didn't take too much of Nairi's time.
well. I'll give Nairi some extra time.
So
We're
have a good evening all.
Thank you. Thank you,
Good
Gavin.
evening.
Okay, guys. So once again, I am very sorry. I am now seeing all of these comments. So I'm going to try to read through comments while, so now that I'm on the right page, we're going in to talk about Paria, the Paria tragedy. Of course, the country would have been outraged. And unfortunately, I want to call the citizens to order that we're no longer outraged. I don't even know if anybody knew that, we had a case hearing yesterday in the magistrate's court. Anybody sharing the information anymore? Anybody care anymore? Where are the placards? And I say it all the time. We have the government that we deserve because as a citizen, the type of that jamming still is like a national anthem, and it should be an insult to us that the city could burn down and we jamming still. 4 of our divers lost their lives. One is still struggling to survive. And we have moved on with our lives as though it did not happen, as though it was not an absolute tragedy. Christopher, Nairi, thank you very much for joining me. Nairi, I know you're not even in the country and you have taken the time. You rushed home from your, your hotel. You've really fit me in. So you are the type of person, you and Christopher, and Gavin and Gary, the persons that really take time out of their day. I know 4 or 5 o'clock is a challenging time to be live on air. So I'm really thankful that you take the time to have these conversations, to inform the persons, to inform the national community. And hopefully through our conversation, we will raise awareness and, improve the country.
Yeah.
Certainly at this point, improve heritage and Paria and the wider, community in terms of employee relations and workplace safety. Christopher, or actually, you know what? I'm going to start with, I'm going to throw the question out. I'm assuming, Nairi, you will answer because you're an attorney at law, but maybe, Chris, you can answer as well. Chris, can I call you Chris? Or do you like
Yeah,
Chris?
that's no problem.
All right. Yesterday, there was a case heard, and I'm gonna try to say it as, and you know what, Nairi, because I could say it simply because I am not a lawyer. You, so I'm gonna ask questions to really make sure that we break it down for the average Joe and Jane. The case before the magistrate court now is not the same as the case that's before the industrial court. And it's also not the case that we hope to be before some court by the DPP. Yes, correct?
That is correct. So there are
Okay.
potentially three kinds of, I'll say it lightly, as prosecutions. So the industrial court has jurisdiction over offenses against the OSH Act, but they would result in civil penalties, which in our neck of the woods would be fines, or in the case of a death, up to $100,000, or 3 years wages for the deceased person. So that's one. The one before the magistrate's court where pleas were taken. I think the first hearing was in July, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And yesterday was the opportunity for the defendants to plead to the offense, to the charges. So the OSH Act also provides, aside from the industrial court civil prosecution, it provides for criminal prosecution pursuant to the Summary Courts Act. So breaking that down, that means before the magistrate's court. And because magistrate's courts in Trinidad operate on a district basis. So if somebody is robbed or somebody does a robbery in Arima, the magistrate in Port of Spain does not have jurisdiction. So similarly, if this loss took place within the jurisdiction of San Fernando, then the proper place for it would be the San Fernando Magistrates Court, which is where I believe it came up yesterday before Magistrate Chanka.
Okay.
So those are charges where under the OSH Act saying that, so if you have to look at the framework of OSH, that an employer, simply put, an employer must provide a safe working environment to his employees, his or her employees, and must maintain that safe working environment. So that if you breach that, if you expose your employees to danger and injury and death, unfortunately, then I said the legislation provides for also, I'll have to say a criminal prosecution because it's pursuant to the Summary Courts Act, which is before a magistrate. So there are other things, there's another penalty lane going on there aside from the industrial court. And the third penalty lane, if you could call it that, is the one where Mr. Lynch, King's Counsel Lynch, who was the chairman of the Commission of Inquiry, would have indicated that he felt that there was more than enough material in the findings to support what would be called corporate manslaughter.
That's right.
So if it is, but
and that's the one that the DPP has to bring now.
No, so
OSH can bring that one as well, or
so the DPP will instruct the police to conduct an investigation.
Right.
I mean, Christopher is there, and for those of us who endured, I was there every single day of the Commission of Inquiry, so I could tell you that there's a lot of information out there. So I don't think it's an issue of reinvestigation. At least I don't want to think so. I mean, I would want to think that some police officer has, together with legal assistance, which may come from the TTPS legal unit or the DPP's office, and they would try to frame that into a criminal framework against the companies, against the individuals.
But that charge will have to come from who? So you have OSH authority bringing charges in civil and criminal charges. So you called 3 lanes basically.
Mm-hmm.
So the third
lane, remember who charges in Trinidad and Tobago is police. If Christopher,
authorized by the
somebody, right?
So that's what I'm trying to find out.
So police will come and charge him, right?
I may be using the wrong terminology,
but the DPP, the right terminology, but the DPP will give advice.
Okay.
Charge Christopher for assault. Charge Christopher for
assault
and battery.
But so that last one is on the advice of the DPP. That's who we're with.
But he will instruct I wouldn't want to say instruct because the DPP doesn't really instruct, but he will advise or recommend to the police that they investigate this with a view to certain offenses being made out. So The DPP can't go and charge somebody. He
Right. No, I
constitutionally
understand.
doesn't
Right.
have that power.
I understand that. I just want for the country to, so there are three charges that can be laid for.
But
So there
possible approaches.
Three.
are three.
Possible approaches to reaching a penalty for the
Right.
persons who are
So
found liable.
we have two out of the possible three ongoing right now. Yes?
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So 15 charges were read out
Yes.
yesterday. The next time would be the evidence would be disclosed. What evidence that OSH authority intend to use.
Yes.
Right. Okay. You spoke about the industrial court, it's fines, 3 years wages for the deceased. What sort of penalties would we be looking at if the OSH authority were successful in the criminal prosecution?
Well, again, so the industrial court doesn't have any criminal penalties.
Yeah, so the magistrate court.
Christopher, they might be telling you that several employers would be locked up if they did.
No, but
Exactly.
So in the magistrate court yesterday,
so those charges are breaches. So even though there's an avenue to prosecute in the magistrate's court, remember the prosecution is not for, as I gave the example, an assault or battery. It's for breach of the OSH legislation.
So what's the penalty if found guilty? What are the penalties?
So simply put, what she would have said before is that they will only have the possibility to implement a fine.
So it'll just be more fines.
Yes, so it will be a fine. We're looking at approximately, for the most, 100,000. Plus, as she also said, there's a means of fining them based on the salary of each of the persons by a multiple of, I believe the number is 12.
Three. No, what you mean in the prosecution in the magistrate's court?
No, this is at the industrial court.
No, so we've got the industrial court out of it. I'm asking about the magistrate court.
All right. Well, at the level of the magistrate court, you can have conviction.
Right. So okay, and what does that mean? Break that down. What does conviction mean?
So based on the judgment of the court, that can be it will also be in alignment with the OSH Act as well. So you can have up to between 1 to 3 years imprisonment for breaches in the OSH Act.
That's what I'm looking for.
Am I correct, Nairi?
I'm gonna check that while we're talking. Because
so there is jail time that
can be the amendment, Christopher. There's a 2006 or 7 or 8 amendment. Because the original OSH Act really was around civil fines. Well, monetary fines. I shouldn't say civil fines.
Yeah. As it is now, it speaks to fines or imprisonment. Right.
So the fact that it's under the Summary Court Act suggests that the magistrate has powers of beyond fine, because it's before a court that has those powers.
Yes.
Right. But I must have missed it. But I say I'm not seeing a jail time. Right, I'm seeing fines as well, and I'm not seeing it in the amendment either. But we will get back to that. Don't worry. Right, I can multitask. Right,
that's what I'm trying to make.
The third layer I'm more positive about, even though I already gave you the caveat. I'm not a criminal attorney, because if that's corporate manslaughter, then that comes under our criminal, well, we have a largely kind of common law kind of thing, but that comes under our criminal penalties. So there's probably a lot more, obviously a magistrate's court and a high court, which would eventually hear anything like corporate manslaughter, certainly doesn't have the same powers to fine you or to penalize you in terms of jail time.
Correct. Well, let me just,
it's going to be the high court.
Let me just read a clause here straight from the OSH Act, right?
Okay, so which section is it?
This is under clause 83A. It speaks to redress. All right, so an aggrieved person may apply to the industrial court for redress, and the industrial court may make an award in favor of the aggrieved person and impose any penalty other than a term of imprisonment
Other
right?
than, yes.
Other than a term of imprisonment,
Mhm.
that a summary court may impose in respect of that contravention or failure to comply.
So, as I say, I'm not seeing anything within the act that
Well, then
specifies.
other than means they can't do imprisonment.
So, no,
The
the industrial
industrial
court
court is
doesn't have.
unable to do that.
No, no, the
Right,
industrial
that's
court
right.
is
So
a.
that's the industrial court.
Yeah,
So
so
that's
the
why I'm
industrial.
asking about
Yeah.
the magistrate's court.
Okay, so I'm not seeing, Christopher, as I said, I will try to look at it while we're talking as well. I'm not seeing a penalty that involves um, incarceration, right? A deprivation of liberty of some form in the OSH Act as before the Magistrates Court. So while it says you can be prosecuted before the Magistrates Court, which of course brings us to the other issue that came up yesterday, that there's there's a what shall we say, an argument as to whether these charges were brought within the time limited to do so by
That is
statute,
correct. But Nairi,
right?
before you go on, let me just give some example of some others here, right? So we're looking at clause 85. This is the penalty where none is expressly provided. Just want to read this clause quickly. Subject to the provisions of this act, any person who commits an offense under this
Oh, yes.
act
Yes.
for which no penalty is expressly provided is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $20,000 and to
And to
imprisonment for
imprisonment for
1 year.
1 year.
And if the offense other than a safety and health offense in respect of which he was convicted is continued after the conviction, he is liable to a further fine of $10,000 for each day on which the offense continues. So there are multiple clauses in the act that speaks to imprisonment. I think the question really is, and I know this was raised in the hearing yesterday, whether the industrial court, whether having the case at both the industrial court and at the magistrate court at the same time is a double whammy. I believe that is one of the matters, one of the fight backs that the attorney is pushing, the defense attorney. But really and truly, I believe that the reason why that is, and I'm not a lawyer, is because, again, fines could be taken at the industrial court and imprisonment could be tackled at the magistrate court.
No, well, I mean, I think remember the pushback is whether either of the matters have been started within the statutory period. So the act, one thing I'm very certain about in the OSH Act, it speaks of that 6 months period that we see coming up.
That's correct.
Okay, so if Christopher is, I like to blame Christopher. So if Christopher is speeding down the road and they charge him for reckless driving, the police only have 6 months to bring those charges. So
Yes.
summary offenses have 6 months. So of course, what the OSH Act does is establish these breaches as a summary offense.
Mm-hmm.
But the Act says, at least reasonably clearly, that the 6 months starts to run not from the commission of the offense, but from the finding of either a commission of inquiry or coroner's inquest.
Yeah, no, that is something that we had a trip to the DPP's office. It was last year, and at that time we had that discussion with him. The advice that he gave to us is that he would have had to make a direct intervention to provide advice with respect to that matter. He couldn't give us the exact details, but what he did say is that this is a matter that he sees going as far as the appeal court to get a decision made. And from what we saw yesterday,
it's in the Privy Council now, isn't it?
Yes. So the defense attorneys aren't even satisfied with the instruction of the appeal court. So now it's at the level of the Privy Council. So what they are asking for now is that the case be held until the Privy Council makes a decision on that ruling. So if the Privy Council rules in favor of the defense, then there's a possibility that the matter could be thrown out of the industrial court. All right?
But not the magistrate court? Is that what you're saying?
The magistrate court has a 2-year period for statute time limitation. Okay. So that will be within the period. But as for the industrial court matter, it will definitely be out. And also to touch on a point raised by Nairi, another discussion had with the DPP was that, and this is in connection with the police investigation. What he did say is that the Commission of Inquiry report there were issues in terms of the quality of the evidence put forward in that document, right? And as a result, going into a case or going into a matter with that alone will be difficult to win. So he would have advised the police to go forward not just based on the evidence in the report, but there's also a need to gather further evidence. And he went as far as to say that the corporate manslaughter case is one that cannot be applied to an individual. In his opinion, the corporate manslaughter charge will be applied to the company Paria as an entity, right? And as a result, no individual will face any sort of punitive action.
So I wanted to read an excerpt that from because we were talking about the when you spoke about bringing it up in the industrial court and in the magistrate court and the difference in the penalties. So senior counsel Pamela Elder explained the rationale for filing complaints in the separate courts, saying OSHA was looking for punishment in the criminal courts and compensation in the industrial court for alleged breaches of the act.
Yeah.
So I do think persons want their pound of blood. I think they want to see somebody go to jail.
I would want to believe so. I would want
I
to
mean,
believe that for the OSH Act to have the teeth that it needs to prevent incidents like this from happening again, the country needs to see some sort of action as a result of this. So seeing a company or individual get a fine for $25,000 is a slap on the wrist. But
Yeah.
seeing somebody face some time behind bars is something that will open the eyes of others to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Right. So I support the push by OSH to take the matter forward in the magistrate court. As
and
for the
even the
police,
fines. I mean, even the fines. Just I think it was last week where Justice Frank Sipasad spoke about like police officers paying the you go to court and you lose a matter in the court. Really and truly, it's the state that pays for it. And
that's
he was
correct.
saying, we need legislation passed where it comes out of the police officer's pocket so that you feel for your decision versus, well, you make a bad decision, you wrongfully arrest somebody, and then in the end, it's the same taxpayer technically paying for the wrong decision. So
That's
I
correct.
do agree that persons need to feel, like really feel the consequence for their action. So
Yeah.
someone is saying, going forward, how is the government going to adjust to protect employees at work? And then, well,
I just wanted to make a point before we move on to the comment. Just as Christopher, then taken from what Christopher said, that same section 85(1) that Christopher has referred to refers to if it is that these breaches continue, that you have additional fines to face and so on. And that brings me to, and I don't even remember the name of the Paria employee that I was cross-examining, and he was very clear when I asked him, so what curative or, what changes have been brought about in Paria's protocols to prevent the reoccurrence of what transpired on that unfortunate day. And his position was nothing. They were waiting on the outcome of the commission of inquiry, which, of course, look at the time that passed. I don't know other further pipe works went on at Paria. So
and we've had incidences.
Paria was quite content, right, to continue just along the same lines that caused these circumstances in February 2022.
But
Yes.
Chris, haven't we had other incidences with involving Paria and Heritage and whoever else since the incident? So it does show that it hasn't stopped.
In fact,
It hasn't stopped.
just last week, we got a report of an employee through a contractor again who would have fell while offshore because of some loose grating on one of them outside, and he is currently in the hospital nursing some serious wounds. Yeah, but again, people won't be hearing about this because unless it is spoken of in a great way, unless a great issue is made of it, nobody seems to care. But it goes back to the question that was raised in the comments: how we go forward protecting employees against this when we really under a system of contract work and labor supply contracts that really pull back on the rights of workers and more focus on, I guess, how to put it, I don't want to say kickbacks, but payments to contractors. And it's slowly eroding the working conditions of workers, as we've seen in Naikwan with Alan Neil, Ramki Soon, as we've seen in Mittal. We're seeing more and more workers lose their lives. And if it's not for a few people who are getting up and saying something about it, this is completely ignored. It's really frustrating.
Now, let me ask you a question in terms of cases that are before the courts, because we're talking about cases that are before the courts. I mean, Nairi, you may, or Chris, I don't know, you seem to have this law thing down. Are we allowed to be talking about it? Can we protest? What can citizens do to ensure that somebody does some jail time? I mean, I can tell you, I was really, it was heartbreaking watching the Commission of Inquiry. I felt as though I saw no remorse. I felt as though I saw no desire to fix anything. And so I would be, and there are persons here saying that's right, they need to set an example so it won't repeat. Yeah. Somebody else is saying, exactly, teach a lesson, no more. I have to say I'm one of those persons saying we need to set an example. And it has to be those at the top. We have persons, they are still drawing a salary. No one has been sent home. No one has been, it is absolutely frustrating to me to know that these people will retire soon, will get their pension, would have their salaries, and it just is like nothing has changed. And as I said, Nairi, you were in the room. I was watching it on TV. Maybe you could say, but I did not get any sense that there was any remorse. I have to say that on LMCS's side, the man lost a son. So at the end of the day, there has been such a natural consequence that no jail time. He lost a son. So whether his charges, he's guilty or not, I do actually think, I feel for him that even if he's found guilty, he has paid the ultimate sacrifice for his breaches for the OSH Act if he's found guilty. The other men are, and an LMCS, they've not taken on a contract since. The other guys are still there drawing a salary every single day. And as I say, they're going to retire. They will get a pension. And it just doesn't feel to me as though they've even...
It's right at all. Yeah.
I mean, I want to be careful because, so only lawyer in the room, and I will say, these matters are sub judice, and we have to be careful about what we say. But just I'm not involved in the magistrates court matter. I'm not involved in the industrial court matter. I don't represent any of those parties. But just looking at it, coming out of the commission, don't worry, sitting in the room was even more painful than watching it on TV. It really was, an emotionally scarring. On my part, I felt emotionally scarred from my participation because before I read a single, we got mounds of paper. But before I opened the first paper, I had formed the view that it was LMCS's fault that the divers had gotten sucked into the pipe. And it was Paria's fault that they had died in the pipe. And all that paper later, all the expert evidence and so on, that was a correct position. An accident happened. How you manage the accident after the fact was very, very important. And how you manage the accident is what caused these divers their lives.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I could tell you, and wearing no particular hat, when somebody reached out to me when the divers were in the pipe, I said, look, take an indemnity. Who anybody wants to go down, if Paria wants to protect themselves, take an indemnity. You want me to write it up? Right? It was a weekend. And I wasn't representing anybody. You want us
Yeah.
to prepare an indemnity so that these guys could go down and rescue, as they called it, their brothers, their fellow workers. And the answer was no. We don't care to get an indemnity. They could die, but where would be the liability?
Let me just interject there, Nairi. You see what you said there? You have brought back memories because on the weekend, the family went
Chris,
as far.
can you turn your device? We're losing you into, yeah, right. A little
Right?
bit more if you can, because I'm losing
Sure.
you in. Okay, right, good. Yeah,
Right.
perfect.
So the family went as far as to engage attorneys to prepare disclaimers to absolve Paria of any responsibilities. And while in the process of getting that done, on Sunday, an announcement was made on public TV. This is all while Paria was moving as though they were entertaining this. An
Mhm.
announcement was made on Sunday stating that it is no longer a rescue operation. Right? So we can't speak too much on it. What I want Trinidad to be able to understand is that this is not a private enterprise that we're dealing with here in terms of Paria. This is a state enterprise. This is an enterprise that is receiving funds from the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, right? And to see the sort of treatment that is dished out to the family members of these divers from a state enterprise, it it shows me that the state enterprises, they, as Marsha would have said, they feel no remorse, and the state does not want to intervene to bring any resolution to this situation that would automatically de-escalate this entire situation. So yes, we have to face the courts. Yes, we know that LMCS will be held responsible for their shortcomings. Even though he would have lost his son, he would have had certain responsibilities to meet, and that is the reality. But Paria is trying to absolve themselves of all responsibility here and put everything on LMCS. And as long as the OWTU is and exists, we will ensure that that doesn't happen. They cannot escape responsibility here. Right? So we are very happy to see what is taking place. At the same time, it is not justice achieved. We all know that there's an election coming, and we all know that the government would like to have this issue placed on the back burner. We must not allow them to escape the responsibility for a state enterprise washing their hands of an issue where 4 persons would have lost their lives, where persons in Paria's management would not have been meeting all their employment requirements. And up till this day, we have people still working there that don't meet the requirements. So we are still facilitating an environment where this can happen again. We have not learned our lesson from what has happened, and the state seems to not care about rectifying this situation. So we are far from achieving justice, Trinidad and Tobago. We are far from achieving justice. What needs to happen is that they need to compensate the families, they need to see these matters through the courts, and they need to address all the issues in Paria that would have led to this incident occurring. Then we could say, yes, Trinidad and Tobago, we learned something and we're moving forward.
Well,
How?
I want to endorse everything that Christopher said there, because what I find to be the great, I've long ago learned to differentiate between law and equity and fairness and justice. These are different concepts. But for me, of 100% victory coming out of this matter would be that the families, you can't, there's no amount of money to ever replace the life of a human being. But the best that we have as human beings in the legal system is to pay financial compensation to the persons who are left behind.
Yeah.
And I find it, even for somebody in litigation for all these years, I find it tragic that we haven't found ourselves, whether through insurance, whether through the government, whether through Paria, to put any meaningful money compensation in the hands of the families. That is a second tragedy. I wouldn't want to say it's a greater tragedy. I just say it's a second deep scar in the national psyche, that you had this tragedy it just worked out very, very badly. Very bad decisions were made. Terrible decisions were made. And then you persecute and you persecute the families and you punish the families even more after the fact by you, well, starting with you're treated very badly by Paria in the heat of the events, immediately
Correct.
following the incident. And then
Yeah.
2 years later, 2.5 years later, people do not have compensation. People have not been compensated.
Yeah.
Workmen compensation has not been paid.
Correct.
Right? Just let's start from, I always tell employers, deal with workmen compensation first. It's what I like to call no fault insurance. I don't have to establish who was negligent, how they were negligent, if they were negligent, if in this case the deceased workers were in fact contributed to their own demise. You don't have to look at all of those things. Even that hasn't been paid them to.
No,
Right?
it
So,
hasn't.
right?
Who's
So
responsible for paying that workman's compensation? LMCS or
The
Paria?
the
direct employer. Yeah,
the direct employer,
So that's LMCS.
that's
right?
correct.
And I hear all sorts of things about, it's an insurance issue and so on, so that no litigation against the insurers. Really, I have to say, in between this I have to say maybe more than 4 sets of families, but let's call them 4 sets of families, are being tortured. Or I should say 5 sets of
Right,
families are
because
being
Chris
tortured.
cannot work.
Five. Well, I spoke to Christopher after he had given evidence, and he asked me very pointedly whether, if I had gone through what he had gone through, whether I would return to the sea, whether I would go back to diving, when I never dived in my life, little snorkeling. And I told him I wouldn't even put my foot in the sea.
Correct.
I, who love the sea and love to swim and so on, I would not put my foot in the sea. So I understand. I can't say I understand why he cannot return to his employment. It's perfectly understandable. For when you talk about emotional scarring, I would say I have a scratch in comparison to the wound that Christopher must have. Well,
Yeah.
not this Christopher, right?
Christopher
Yeah.
Boudram. Yes.
Right. And I said it pains me that I said we haven't found a way. I said, well, I'm not wearing any political hat. I'm just going to say whether it's Paria, whether it's the government interceding because it's a state enterprise, whether it's the insurance company, whether it's the employer. If you're in the position of these families, do you really care what the source of the compensation is? Whether it's the matter in the industrial court resulting in a fine and you get compensation from that. What the source of the compensation is, as far as I'm concerned, irrelevant. The fact that it has not been paid is tragic.
Agreed
And
fully.
the findings that came out of the Commission of Inquiry is an indictment. A very, very, and I don't mean a criminal indictment, but an indictment about how Paria conducts its business. So I don't have to talk about anything in the current cases. I can just talk about the findings that came out. It might not be the quality of evidence, Christopher, that can support a criminal matter, because in a criminal matter, you need live witnesses, people with statements, people who are going to come and
That's
give
correct.
evidence, and who are going to be cross-examined by criminal counsel and so on. So it's a different quality of evidence.
But Nairi, let me just interject there, because you see what you said there. I agree with you 100%. But I don't know if you remember the newspaper article that was giving a status update on the police investigation. They actually made a statement. They released a statement that not one person has been interviewed thus
And
far.
I am
And-
not surprised. And that again is another tragedy, because it is the
Yes.
DPP, Christopher, to carry it back. It is the DPP who came out and said, this is what I did, this is what I advise the police to do, and I don't know anything about the status of it.
Yeah.
And it came out of that, if you like, public declaration by the DPP, that we understood that there's nothing. The reason he has no status is because nothing is being done. Now, you have to ask yourself again, the commissioner of police has to direct, I don't know who, whether homicide, whether, I have no idea, right? Whichever set of officers or unit or department of the police services, that why 2.5 years later, when you have, remember what I said, a kickstart, At the end of the day, you have a big kickstart because you have a framework, you have a commission of inquiry, you have witnesses. You don't want to look for witnesses. We don't want to look for Tom, Dick, and Harry Lal. We know who the witnesses are.
Exactly.
Actually, I bounced up one in the airport, the expert. Right? So you know who your witnesses are. So the police task has been lightened in my view. Even though I say I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I have a little idea. I've seen the kind of statements that come out for criminal prosecutions or used in criminal prosecutions. And I it's just a tragedy of immense proportions because in every direction you turn,
It's a failure.
these families are not getting justice. These families are not getting compensation. I long ago decided that I'm going to separate things like law, justice, equity, fairness. Keeps body and soul together, what keeps your children in school and meets your bills is compensation. Because we can't replace those men who lost their lives. But
Correct.
we can at least make sure that their families have the income that they would have brought in for their families and have that to live on. And as a society, we have not achieved that, and therefore we have failed those men a second time.
That's correct.
And there are five of them this time because I say one is alive.
Yeah.
So we do have family members listening on, and I'm getting goosebumps, and I want to make sure I don't cry on air because we do have family members and supporters, well, close friends of the family, and they are writing, the conversation. They have to continue to relive the conversation. They have to continue to relive the experience every time. But it's a double-edged sword because if they don't relive the incident to keep the conversation alive, then as you said, Christopher, it'll just die.
It will.
So here they are, every single opportunity they can, they are asking, keep the conversation alive, even though it is painful for them to relive it as vividly as it was yesterday. So I am hearing, I won't call your names or we're on air, but I am reading all of the comments. I mean, I guess you guys have your names there, so because it's Facebook and YouTube and stuff. But Chris, you said, every direction is a failure. And I
Yeah.
actually, I'm going to come back to citizens because some persons will say, well, I'm not anybody. But if we can have 100,000 and 100,000 put up 1.5 million, even 20,000. I have been to some of the protests outside of the refinery.
Yeah.
And you,
I remember.
I don't even know if we have five. And I mean, and that requires me leaving home at like 5 a.m. to, 6 a.m. or whatever to reach and to just join hands once I know about it and I can reach. Where is
Why
the
are we here?
outrage? Yeah, where is the outrage? And where is that pressure, that public pressure to
Let me
see something done?
let me
Where
let me
is that public pressure, like real pressure? 100,000 persons absolutely frustrated and upset, willing to stand hand in hand and go to jail if we must, arrest all 100,000 of us, tear gas us, do what you must. But we would want to cuss and get on for a bad drive, and we want to cuss and get on for somebody. If we're going to
Yeah,
do it if across the line. I mean, I think we are an aggressive people. We
we are.
are numb to anger, and yet our anger can't seem to be for the right causes. We
I want to
can't
put in a
seem
plug.
to
I want to put
bury
in a plug
this.
here for Trinidad and Tobago citizens, and what we had to understand, and I know it's difficult to understand, but Trinidad and Tobago citizens are bombarded with so much negative news that I believe now we are bordering on the point of being numb to abuse and numb to these stories. Imagine we live in a Trinidad and Tobago where families in Diego Martin being wiped out, where 5-year-olds in
On
Maruga
my street, I live on
being
Pioneer
killed,
Drive.
yeah,
Yeah.
where you have 81-year-old, 71-year-old women being raped in Arima. You have it's
We had an
constant,
11-year-old. He was robbed.
Correct.
Somebody
For 20
threw an
something dollars.
11-year-old down in the street, pushed him on the pavement, and took $27 out of his pocket.
Yeah.
It's 1 minute to 6. And I mean, I feel like hopefully what we've done today is at least break it down, because sometimes I feel the headlines are misleading. So people think somehow it reached into court, so there's justice served. We are so
That's
far
correct.
away from justice being served.
Absolutely.
And that's why I wanted to make sure, because the headlines somehow make it out as though,
The families get justice.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well
we
said.
are far from justice. Far from justice. And that's what I wanted to come out of this case, out of this interview. What I also wanted to make sure I was clear about is that no advice from no DPP come yet. So we still have the DPP office, if you ask me, to put some pressure on. We just spoke about the witnesses, and so there is still a third lane. There is still a third arm that has been silent, that has been moving slow and snail. And we, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, as I close, we are failing our divers. I genuinely believe we are the final piece of the puzzle, and we need to find our voice and do right by these divers. Chris, I know that you guys, you could tell us when is the next time you need us, wherever it is. I mean, social media, even through social media, we have seen where if we bombard social media enough with a conversation, things can happen, even if it is social media. And I just think that we have forgotten these divers once again. Last 5 seconds. Anybody wants to say a 5 seconds? Because it's now 6:01. So I do have to, they'll cut me off.
I think we've said everything. And again, we are people who don't protest and for long. So it's really up to people like everybody on the screen there to keep people's feet to the fire and keep an interest. We are 7-day wonder country. We can't argue that. Right?
This has been kept alive for 2.5 years, eh?
Well, we forget too easily, and I agree with Christopher. We are becoming numb.
Yeah.
It's murder and mayhem out there every day. An unending stream of disaster and tragedy. So yes, you have to become numb. If you're not numb, I think all of us will be looking for space in St. Anne's.
Okay, guys, we have to close. I'm sure on radio somewhere they've cut us off. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Nice to see you virtually, Christopher.
All right. Yes. Good to see.
Take care.
All right. Take care, Miss Alfonso, Miss Walker.
Take care.
Well, have a good day.
Thank you so much, Marsha. That was a hard talk with Marsha Walker and guests Gary Griffith, Gavin Nicholas, Nairi Alfonso, and Christopher Jackman. Marsha will be back next Thursday for another edition of Hard Talk right here at Power 102 Digital.